So at the moment, just to give a bit of a current status, dam storages are actually pretty good. Yeah, obviously we've had a couple of extremely wet years and an extended cycle. This is about where you'd expect to sit in a pretty good year anyway. The inflows have been a little bit down over the last month or so, as most of you would probably be aware, but yeah, the dams are in a healthy spot, and if we get a decent winter next year, should be reasonable, all things being equal. But you know, one of the things we're going to notice with these dam storages over time, as the environmental water holder purchases more and more water, and these are big numbers that we'll go through shortly, is we're effectively shrinking the dams. You know, if they have another 600 gigalitres, 1,000 gigalitres of water, that's got to sit somewhere. And so that's going to affect a whole heap of market mechanisms that we will run through as we go through the process. December to February, they've been going on about this for a while. We've been told we're going to be wetter than average, but it's only been the last week we've started to see that. I think that the big change in these averages are the fact that we're getting a huge amount of rain in a very short period of time. I mean, Sydney's not in the basin, I understand that, but they had 47 mils of rain in 17 minutes the other day. And so if you look at that as a rain event, yes, it adds to the average of the month, but whether it has the same effect on irrigation as, you know, a nice drop of rain every couple of weeks, the weather patterns seem to have changed quite significantly, and we are heading, by all accounts, into a fairly warm cycle as well. We had a chat with the Bureau about 6 months ago, and they actually pointed us towards this long-term climate stuff. And I'm not taking a political view on climate change. You know, that's up for everyone to debate. But these are facts. You know, since 1960, we've been heading north in temperature, and there's some pretty significant effects that they're forecasting when you get these higher temperatures, and some of it's going to be related to rainfall as well. You have warm nights, you get this evaporation effect, and rainfall occurs. So what we see over the next 30 years, who knows, but I think it's got to be part of our irrigation planning as far as water safety goes, because, you know, we've had this period where we just haven't had to consider it at all, and at some point we are in Australia and it's going to get hot and dry again. So when we sort of look at this water management piece with a customer, we sort of go through, you know, there's some pretty simple questions that often aren't addressed. You know, how much usable water do I actually need? Because what we see through the market is, in different markets, people do the same thing every year, but don't necessarily make choices at the right time. And we'll be touching on that again later on, when to enter the market. How much water will I need in 5 years is something that a lot of people don't necessarily take into account, you know, with maturity of trees, vines, whatever you've got on your property. You know, that need in 5 years, if you take in to some trees or vines coming out, some going in, some hitting maturity, and the potential for, you know, less rain and increased temperature, there's a fair bit of thought that needs to go into that 5-year to 10-year plan. As I said, we'll go through the federal buyback. There's some big numbers there. This is not designed to cause any panic or any you know, undue stress, but it's numbers that need to be addressed. One of the water management strategies that we've been talking to people about is, do I have a dry, wet and average season plan, if there is such a thing as an average season plan? So we'll have a bit of a look at how that goes too. The use of different water mechanisms is really important. You know, you can really shield yourself from massive price variations and maximise your use of water and your profit into the business. So, yeah, that's things like carryover, long-term leases, forward trades, all that sort of stuff, and having a plan around if and when you enter the water market. How do you assess your water position during the season? You know, we talk to a lot of people and they go, oh yeah, I'm going to need some water sometime around February. Well, perception is not measurement, and what we see is a lot of people do the same thing, and all of a sudden people have to enter the market at the same time. Now, in the markets we've had, it's been pretty easy because the price has been moderate, but we see, particularly in dry periods when water's $500, it can jump to $600 in days. It doesn't take very long to change. And the other thing we're trying to get people to have a look at is, where is your actual risk in the business? So each of these different licenses have different pros and cons, and this will be a fairly broad view, and I'm very happy to take questions if anyone has any. But depending on where you are, what you're growing and everything else, just because you're a South Australian grower doesn't mean that you have to have South Australian water, or vice versa with Victoria and New South Wales. There's strong argument to have it spread across at least 2 states, because you do get different abilities from each class of licence. As you can see, class 3, generally South Australia gets 100%. You know you're getting it before the season starts, but you don't have carryover. So if there was a mixture in your portfolio of Victorian water, and whether it be high or low reliability, or New South Wales water, it gives you this flexibility at the end of the season. If water's $20 a meg, which it was at the end of last season, do you let it go down the river? Do you sell it at $20? And by the time you pay your government fees and charges, you're really not coming out with a lot. So using these different classes of licence can be very advantageous to a business. Where we're at, any questions so far, please just yell out if you have any. I'm very happy to take them. There's the basin plan has started, and there's some pretty important dates and things happening through that. Obviously, the first round of the buyback has been and gone. We still haven't seen any pricing out of that, or any acceptances. So we're sort of in limbo at the moment to where the value of permanent water will end up. I don't think the government's going to be paying, 50, 60% above market rate at the moment. There's enough willing sellers out there to start ticking through, and what happens in future years may change, but at the moment I think there's going to be enough water offered to them to satisfy them in the short term. The SIDLAND projects, we've got a diagram we'll go through. These are really important because the buyback numbers are huge, and the SIDLAND process was all about water management improvement and infrastructure improvement, and those projects have a deadline, and if they're not met, the water that they were saying they'd save from there then goes back into a buyback program. So very, very important. The repeals on the 1,500 gigalitre buyback, there's no limit on where they buy water now, how much out of each area. That's all changed as well. There is going to be further reviews to the Water Act as this process goes through, and one of the big changes both for intermediaries and for irrigators is the ACCC starting to come into the market, or monitor the market in a much more stringent, structured way, which we've been advocating for a long time. We're very happy to see them come in, and the Inspector General of Water Compliance. They're an independent body. They are nice people. They're very helpful, but they also carry a very big hammer at the end of the day, that they're there for a reason. And the First Nations water, this has just started, and they've got $100 million to spend over the next few years, and that's outside the federal buyback, and that's across the whole basin. So these figures here, it's this bottom row where these efficiency programs of 450 gigalitres, if any of those projects don't get finished, if they don't deliver what they say they're going to do, this line moves, and it'll move to more buybacks, less efficiency projects. And they've got till, I think, June next year to really show where these projects are up to. So in effect, there's up to a bit over 1,000 gigalitres that need to be recovered, but it's where it comes from that's going to be the challenge. And at the moment, I spent all day yesterday trying to find any information on completed SIDLAND projects, and there aren't any that we can find. They may be completed, but the data's not there. So the basin governments have until 30th of June 25 and then there's no more sit-around projects to be entered. And then 30th of June 26, they can amend or withdraw those programs. But the reconciliation process, which will mean, are they going to deliver that water? Are they not going to deliver that water? Will be looked at by December 31, 2026. So it's not very far away. There's some thought that you need to give around where the government buys this water, because through different cycles, there'll be different effects. So New South Wales general security, predominantly used on rice, cotton, annual crops. When they get 20%, they don't use that water, they sell it. So that's then feeding into South Australia, New South Wales and Victorian permanent plantings. Now, we'll show the figures on what Zone 11 and 10 have as a long-term yield and the cost of that. And that's a pretty attractive product to the government at this stage. And they're big licenses, so they'll potentially grab a chunk of that. And once we go into a dry cycle, we could see, we've seen in the past water at $1,200 a meg. I don't think it's necessarily going to go past that, but it could extend that period, because that, for those horrible numbers, it's always been 1 or 2 weeks that it's sat there and the market stops and corrects itself because people just pull out of the market. But if that period gets extended, people are going to have to enter the market with permanent plantings, and it's something that really needs to be watched as the buyback continues. The Murrumbidgee in and out trade, depending on where they buy water, they're going to have a change in the intervalley trading capacity, and when the environmental water holder moves water around, they actually have enough water to open and close any of the intervalley trading opportunities that we have. If they went to Zone 7 in a strong way, in a wet year, the New South Wales to Victoria trade limit is not open, or tradability is not open until there's a low risk of spill in Victoria. So that means all that water is quarantined to effect between, it can go to South Australia from New South Wales, but to supply water into Victoria, you would have to bounce it from New South Wales into South Australia and back to Victoria. And that's where quite a lot of the supply from those, again, general security licenses can come from. So it may change the availability of that water early in the season. Yes, you'll have plenty of water at the time, but it just shuts markets down. And the smaller a market, the more volatile they tend to be. If they go into the Goulburn in Zone 1, there's water comes out of the Goulburn every year into the Murray system. People that rely on that water coming from one property to another might have some issues if they start to move bigger chunks of water around from there. And South Australia, we get this early season availability of water from South Australia, day 100%. So if they bought too big a chunk of South Australian water, that first couple of months of the season, there could be some restriction on supply. All this is hypothetical at the moment. As I said, not trying to create any duress. It's really just be aware. So this is what I was talking about with long-term average yield. And in the buyback, they're buying long-term average yield, not a megalitre of water equals 1 megalitre of water. So, I mean, the top line, Murrumbidgee General Security at 0.591, let's call it 0.5 for maths. They need to buy 2 of them to equate to 1 megalitre of buyback, or just under 2. And as we go through, class 3, 0.887. So even these really reliable water sources don't have 100% long-term average yield. And that's where these numbers that are in the diagram we looked at before are megalitres. They're not taking into account that you might need to buy more megalitres to make up the number of megalitres in that diagram, or more entitlement. These figures are just on the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder too. So we need to remember that there's an environmental water holder in every state as well. So they're not necessarily part of the buyback, but there's more environmental water than just the Chew. And at the moment they hold about 18, the Chew hold about 18% of what was the consumptive pool at the beginning of the process. If they go through the whole, if they're successful in the buyback, it'll end up at about 27. And I got an estimate that means that they'll end up between the states and the federal government, they'll end up with about 32% of what was the consumptive pool. So these are huge numbers. And prices, according to ABARES, this is ABARES stats, will increase. Interestingly, they also say that the 5-year average water use could decrease, and that would be a result of annual croppers not planting, not using their water, potentially holding on to it for a year, who knows, but there'll be a trigger point financially where each individual commodity will say it's not worth planting this year. Obviously, when you get to almonds, it's down to 0.2%, but there's bigger numbers in rice and cotton and that sort of thing. As I said, prices are likely to increase. It's just simple supply and demand. Long-term average, if they get 225 gigalitres, $45 a megalitre will be. And this is across the basin. It's really hard to do it for a group on individual areas because every area's got a different base price, but across the basin, it's going to increase. As we've touched on, the supply factors, the changing climate is going to have an effect. There was a piece of work I was reading the other day that if there's a 20% deficit in rainfall for the year, there's a 50% deficit in inflows. So any of this sort of long-term change that we're being told about potentially has a bigger impact on allocation than just, we've dropped a bit of rainfall. It magnifies itself as far as inflows into the dams go. The government water's gone forever. Legislated, we won't see it again, and it's big numbers. When you consider that South Australia gets class 3 in its entirety is 600 gigs of water, we're looking at potentially 1,000 gigs of water being brought out of the system. These are really, as I said, not panic numbers, but they're stuff you want to be aware of. There's also other things happening with water that is going to start to take water out of the system. Mining's been around for a while, but there's some more urban activity around the place, and people are looking to shore up and buy, for all intents and purposes, stock and domestic water for these extra houses along the river. The First Nations water we've talked on. The difference there will be that water potentially stays in the consumptive pool. So not quite as influential on the pricing side of things. But we also think that as temporary water comes back in to the higher prices, the investors will start to get in and they'll see the capital growth again, that we've had this little dip in permanent pricing. I think once the government really start releasing where they're at, there's potential for that number to change. There's also a fair bit of demand around. We're getting inquiries quite consistently from renewables and particularly hydrogen. There's a couple of big projects along the Hume, and there's going to be potentially a hydrogen truck track from Brisbane through Sydney down to Melbourne. And there's a place on the Murrumbidgee where they're looking at setting up a sort of super service station for refueling hydrogen trucks, and they'll produce the hydrogen there. And that will be potentially drawing water straight out of the Murrumbidgee, or Tarcutta Creek, I think is the actual water source, but it's a part of the Bidgee system. So, this growth in renewables will create a different challenge. The cost of water to them is almost irrelevant. They're working on multi-million dollar projects that if they had to pay $10,000 a meg for permanent water, they can do it. What they need is absolute reliability, and they will have to have water 24/7 every day of the year. So when we look at particular markets or particular industries, now these figures I want you to take with a grain of salt, because 14 megs per hectare would be in full production. Okay, and not all of them are in full production, we know that, but we don't have an average of what is happening there as far as age of almond trees goes. But there's 67,000 hectares of almonds in Australia that we know, a lot in the basin that we know of. And you know, if they were all at full production, that's 938,000 megalitres. It's a big industry, and it's one of the higher value agricultural industries, as you're probably aware. So most of that is on the Murray system, a little bit up on the Murrumbidgee. Now, at the moment, these figures don't include water that can supplement the Murray. So it doesn't include water that comes out of the Goulburn. It doesn't include water that comes out of the Murrumbidgee, and it doesn't include carryover. So this is as far as allocation for that season goes. But if they buy all the water, depending on a little bit on where it comes from, there's not actually enough water in the system for almonds, let alone anyone else. So this is where these market tools that you're going to need to look at, as far as carryover, as far as how much permanent entitlement you've got, as far as coverage for that goes compared to your usage, and really deal with it is going to be something that's going to be an ongoing challenge. Again, these figures are not for panic, they're for thought. Improving water literacy is really important, and one thing that we find consistently is that people know a heap about their water source and they know very little about the rest of the system. And there's market events and legislative events that happen through the market, well, through the basin, that will affect the price of water wherever you are. And it's an availability thing. And an example would be the Goulburn intervalley trading opportunity. You get 70 to 90 gigalitres come out in one hit. So some of that's already accounted for, but some of it hits the market. But you probably want to know about it, because it can, in dry periods, affect the market quite significantly. At the moment, we get a $10 or $20 variation in the price of water, not really devastating to anyone. If it's $200, it makes a big difference. And again, we can't stress heavily enough this planning on dry, average and wet years. And I think it goes further than that. You almost need a loop. So you've got this wet going into average, average going into dry, and dry going into average, and average back into wet. And all these different mechanisms and the timing of the activation of these mechanisms run certainly a way you can increase your profit. This is just, so I've been talking a lot. Does anyone actually have any comment, question or thoughts on that? These two graphs I brought out, I was looking at the other day, and as you can see, it's from 2017 to 2019. We're looking at July 2017, the market opens up around $100, which isn't an uncommon $100, $150 just to find a place for the market to start. But then when you look at the pricing by July 2000, that's only 2 years difference, and you're at $620. So that's where, if you're making decisions, say in 2018, thinking, well, dam storages are starting to drop, long range forecast is this, you can start to activate some of these plans well out. And even if it's long-term leases and that sort of thing, you do see when temporary water's expensive, it then reflects in the cost of long-term leases. So the time to write a long-term lease is when it's wet. If you're going to take the water in, is when it's wet, people are more likely to come to a lower price then in the middle of the drought, if water's $600, it's hard to explain to someone that they should then sign a lease to sell their water to you for $300. It's just human nature. We see it go the other way too, from July 2020 through to July 22. Yeah, $330-ish, $340 a meg, and just a constant down from there. I mean, there were some remarkable rain events and floods and all sorts of things in this time. And yeah, the floods had a devastating effect on crops, pumps, everything. Yeah, it was a terrible time. But this is all part of the planning, because potentially it happens again. So we're sort of looking at these key, if you boiled it down to 5 key points, your water balancing or how to stay compliant is going to be really important. The fines are not parking fines. We've seen fines of over $1 million already. And they're going to be much more stringently enforced. I think it's really important for anyone from South Australia to understand that quarterly balancing doesn't exist there. By legislation, you are meant to be in credit the whole time. Now, if something doesn't go wrong, you'll probably get away with it. But if you ever had a problem, you're leaving yourself exposed to massive fines. Really need to be aware of interstate trading balances and restrictions and opportunities through that, where you may be able to pick up some cheap water, or if you're selling water, make sure you don't sell it on the day, or try and sell it on the day that 90 gigalitres comes out of the Golden, because there will be plenty of water around at that point on simple supply and demand stuff. The best insulator, and it's just an insurance product, are forward and long-term leases. And these might not necessarily save you money every year, but they will flatten out your risk profile. And if you're leasing water out, it gives you a guaranteed income. And if you're leasing it in, you're getting that water. The only thing with long-term leases is that the allocation risk is with the lessee. So you need to take into account that depending on which part of the river you're on, what entitlement you're leasing will reflect the value in that. We have been working on a system with a management calendar in it. Again, this goes back to the whole management side of things. You need to know when the market events are. You need to have some structure around it, particularly moving forward. And moving between wet and dry periods, no 2 years are the same, but we need to, if there's no plan at all, you will end up in a bit of a pickle at some point. So touching again, these are the forward trades. You carry the purchaser doesn't carry the allocation risk. That's usable water you've got going into the next year. Long-term leases have their advantages and certainly have their place. Carryover, both as a holder and a placer, depending on where you are, there's advantages. For instance, in Victoria, if you're a Victorian water holder, you could carry over someone's water on your high reliability, and there's a natural hedge there that if there's a risk of spill and you don't get that water back, water's going to be dirt cheap. If it's dry, you will get that water back anyway between your allocation and you'll still get your 100%. So it works. Other way around, you just pay someone to carry water over for you, do your sums, see what you think the price will be next year. You can get allocation at the right price, and you can get the parking space at the right price. There's an insurance product there. And it's not a sales pitch today, but we have developed a bit of a tool that puts all this stuff into all the management stuff into one site. Works on, and a couple of you I know have spoken to this already. If anyone's got any questions, offline, I'm happy to take any more input from there and get back to you. Integrates a lot of this stuff. This is one of the more powerful graphs out of the whole thing, because this is based on real data from last year, and the sort of straight line through is the total water, which is allocation, water you've bought, water you've sold. The budget is the orange line, and the green line is use, the dotted line projected use. Last season, if you had recognised here that you had an excess of water compared to your budget, water was about $220 a meg November, early December last year. If you waited till the end of the season to sell it and you sold it here, it was $20 a meg. So this is where we're sort of talking about these different strategies and really improving the water literacy to understand that making a decision to enter or not to enter the market is important. We tie that into a calendar, and that sets once you've developed your plan, the calendar would be how you use your plan.